So I just got done watching the series finale and the last season of Umbrella Academy, which was both frustratingly disappointing and yet somehow still managed to make me feel things. So props to that. I did not read the comic book at all. This show came out at a time where there was just a lot of super media still happening across the board. And it's one of those shows that had an incredibly strong start and stayed pretty consistent for the first three seasons. When season three ended on a cliffhanger, I was intrigued, excited, curious to see where it would go. There were a lot of storytelling opportunities, and you can see the bones of those storytelling opportunities in season four. The problem is they did not have enough time to do it. The previous seasons being more than 10 episodes gave it enough of that wiggle room that a lot of these early, and I'm saying early, but 2019 really was kind of the end of the early streaming shows, right? Those made for streaming shows. You know, at that point, as we went into 2020 and then through the pandemic, it was a much broader category of shows available on streaming platforms, and there was no longer that veneer of pseudo prestige that you'd find with something like HBO or Showtime, but on a smaller budget. So, what happened? I genuinely don't know. I haven't read many interviews with the showrunner, who, if I'm not mistaken, there were a messy mess of a person. So we're not going to get into that, but we are going to talk about the show, because if there's one thing that's clear from this fourth season and from the show in general, is that the cast must really love this work, their characters, the chemistry that they have with each other, which for the majority of the time there is some really great emotional and comedic chemistry between these characters. When you have this many characters playing this big group of dysfunctional siblings, adopted siblings, like you get a lot of interesting dynamics. There's a lot of opportunities for drama, which they really played into throughout the run of the show. And by the end of season three, we had kind of gotten to a point where at least the original Umbrella Academy, everyone except Ben, and the original Academy, including Lila, had become closer. You know, they had resolved a lot of the childhood trauma and competitiveness that was laid into them by the first version of Hargraves, which puts it in a weird place, because I didn't realize who the hell the woman standing next to him at the end of season three was. So let's get into season four. But first off, if you didn't know and you didn't Google it in between the end of season three and episode 5 of season four, which I watched all in one day, the woman that was standing next to him was his original wife, Abigail. I had no clue, because, and I'm shocked, and this is the thing that shocks me about the show, they managed to maintain the same cast throughout. I can't easily name a specific recast from the show. None of the kids were recast. The father wasn't recast. The robot mom wasn't recast. So it is thoroughly impressive that the show managed to maintain the cast the entire time, especially coming out of the pandemic. And luckily, this show avoided the writer's strike, which has its ups and downs, right? Obviously, the cast and the writers not really affected by the changes to their structures if they're SAG-AFTRA or Writers Guild. But this season wasn't affected by the writer's strike. And it being in production during 2023 means that it wasn't heavily affected by COVID, not like a lot of other shows, and even the earlier, the second and third seasons. So it's kind of baffling what happened here. So the season starts out, the siblings are in a new timeline where they don't have their powers. And we immediately jump 6 years in the future. which is kind of insane, but okay, because we want them to have relatively normal lives. I think that was the big thing, is they wanted to set it up in a place where in some way, shape, or form, the siblings had accepted a normal existence with no powers, embracing the idea of having families and jobs, all of those things that we didn't really see, that some of them had strived for, especially Victor. I think Victor gets the most development this season. Um, but I also think that Victor had the least remaining kind of character development to go through. I think there were other characters that just needed a little bit more time on screen. And I think, and it doesn't come down to they should have, cut certain time from Victor, from Elliot Page. It's more so this season needed 2 to 3 more episodes. 6 episodes was not enough in the slightest. It needed, I say 3 to 4. I mean, it should have just been the 10 episode count, but even just an extra episode or two. I think the biggest thing is that we don't spend enough time with some of the newer characters to really get what their vibe is at all. Which is frustrating, because you want to get to know these new characters, and there are 3-ish, I'd say, new characters that matter to this season. We're introduced to Dr. Jean and Dr. Jean, played by Nick Offerman and Megan Mullally, who is they're married comedian couple. Nick Offerman was in Parks and Recs. They big careers, and both very funny comedians, and they're very funny in the show with the characters they're given. It's just that we're not given nearly as much time as we are with some of the other characters we see previously in the show. I think specifically of the two agents in the first season, Pogo and is it Hazel, were in the first season with the masks. Also, you have Addison Walsh's character, who was relatively developed and had a fantastic arc. So with those two, we don't really get that. They strictly are characters that are brought in to be the thing that's propelling the apocalypse forward. They're like Victor's boyfriend in the first season. But again, Victor's boyfriend, whose name is escaping me, but still felt more developed. I still remember more about that character than I do of these characters. And I just watched the season today. It needed an episode with them to breathe. And I don't know if that's fully like an episode just dedicated to them, or just more so even just a scene or two of them experiencing the kind of aftershocks of these various timelines that they are supposedly feeling, right? I think if we had maybe even first episode, if you're going to do the 6-year cut, why immediately kind of hone in on the siblings when you can really dig into these new characters and show us, the show loves doing montages. Show us the montage of them kind of coming to the realization that they're both having these moments and these dreams. And again, these things aren't shown in the show this season. It's all implied. It's all exposition dumped. And so that's where the bones are there. It's just the execution's very disappointing. But just have those moments of them realizing the things that they lost, because throughout the majority of the season, we know that they're correct, right? We know that they're right. We know that, yes, there are multiple timelines and all these big tragedies have happened, all this thing. We know that. But what we don't have is the emotional connection to their past, their actual past, that make them right. And I'm not in the camp of all antagonists need to be sympathetic antagonists, but the idea of having the main antagonists for the final season of the show be just civilians that have been impacted by the Hargreaves choices in the last 3, really wonderful concept. And I think it is just 40% executed here. So I think an extra episode's worth of time even just spent on them and other people in their cause. I think them having some sort of recurring first mate, or even just interactions with some of the other higher profile keepers. You know, by the end of the season, it's revealed that Five's boss at the CIA is a keeper. You know, so even just moments of that situation would have helped flesh out those characters more than just background noise and commentary. So that was one frustrating part. Another frustrating part for me was we got this wonderful montage of Five and Liila being trapped in the subway station / alternate dimension, settling down after 7 years, which is mind blowing, right? And that's fantastic. The inclusion of that story beat, I think, is really interesting. And we needed a fuller episode, or just more of that, of what they really went through, to fully appreciate that. But then also on the flip side, we needed so much more time after for Diego and Liila and Five to process that. I think and this is all rambly, this wasn't planned, but I think one of the most frustrating things is just, while we got closure for the emotional trauma that the siblings share, but kind of from the first season, right? We don't get that for a lot of the problems introduced in this season at all, right? Like, they never come to terms with Ben after he, you know, basically forces the choice on them to take the drinks. And the same thing goes for Allison and Klaus, where it's that thing of, he didn't want it and it was thrust upon him, and it led him to spiral back down to the bottom of the barrel, which I don't know what on the production caused it to be like the way it was, where it felt the need to separate the characters out again. You know, I get that budgetary restraints mean that you're not going to have every character on screen every moment. You don't want that. But what made it hard, especially with how short the season was, is just following the passage of time. Because we're led to believe that they traveled, I think it was like 13 hours away from the town they were in at the start of the show. And that Klaus gets back and does this like whole arc thing within a very short amount of time. And then Allison gets back. So either the show takes place over 4 or 5 days with a lot of back and forth, or it takes place over a longer period of time. And actually, now that I think about it too, in the last episode, when they arrive at Liila and Diego's house, and Five's reassuring Liila because she's terrified to see again, which is another, it would have been interesting to see this story play out a little bit more. She's worried and afraid of what the reaction of her kids are going to be to how long she's been gone, even though for them, and he says it's been hours for them. What do you mean it's been hours for them? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And maybe I misheard the length of time for them to get places, but I don't think I did. I think it genuinely was just kind of poorly written in that regard. And his storyline, again, it felt like it just needed a little more time. It felt the whole season felt rushed through. Luther and Diego barely have anything going. I mean, Diego's got the whole like, oh, I'm doing this job that I don't like angle, and he's got the general like sitcom daditis, where it's like, my life, I have it and I don't like it, bah, kind of thing. And we don't see that resolved, really. They wasted a lot of, it's not even like they wasted time, it's just that they didn't have enough time. Luther, who mostly got to a lot of his resolutions, or, you know, last season, might as well have been set dressing this season. I can't think of a single thing in the season that he does that specifically drives the plot forward. And that's not to say I don't like Luther or the actor that plays him, but it is to say that the character was just there this season. Same kind of goes for Allison, but at least we had her and Klaus having their arc. I really like the stuff with Victor and Hargrave Sr. I think that exploring that relationship a little more in depth was well deserved and well executed. I think it was performed well. It was mostly written well around the kind of rushed situation that they were in. The writing for Ben was all over this place this season because it was also not, it was not Ben that we had gotten to know in the first two seasons. It was Ben from season 3 who was not really related to the Umbrella Academy folks, and therefore the stakes felt flat. And I feel like we needed a little more time with the siblings with Ben and not just a birthday party, which there were a lot of really great slice of life moments this season. I think that's one thing one of few things it had going for it was the slice of life elements. Typically, in the previous seasons, the characters were either always separated into pairs or into singles with other characters, or when they were together, it was the big climactic event each season. So to get some scenes and some moments of the characters just being siblings and being kind of normal for a change was really great. The restaurant scene, them in the van going to find Jennifer, which we need to get into Jennifer and we will, but there was a lot of those moments that I think worked really well. And that speaks more to, I think, the cast and their chemistry over the 4 seasons as opposed to the writing, because they were working around very kind of clunky, like, here's exposition. And the other thing is, if you're going to have the visual effects look like they do in this season, why did you cut the episode count? Because the budget clearly did not go into the visual effects at all. These are some of the roughest visual effects I've seen in a long time. Some of it looking straight out of Smallville. And in the last 2 episodes. So the big threat this season is that Ben, who, just like the other Academy members, have material called Marigold in them, which I don't know if it was mentioned previously, and if it was, man, I forgot about it. They've all got Marigold in them, which is the thing that makes them super. It's the thing that impregnated their respective mothers across the globe. Whereas it's discovered that Jennifer, this other girl, has another chemical, which the word starts with D, and I really can't remember what it was, and I'm not going to look it up right now because we're going to just keep moving along. And when these two things combine, it creates this cataclysm of an event. It is bad, and we find out, this was good. This was really good here. There's this moment where they finally, like in episode 3, finally get to Hargrave's estate, and they meet Abigail, his wife, which, by the way, again, I had to Google who that woman was. And to my shock, same actress. They managed to get the same actress, and she was only in a flashback and showed up as a corpse. So props to them for being able to get that actress and do with it what they did. We needed an episode focused on that relationship. We needed it. It needed to be there. Like first or second episode. First episode should have opened with the 6 years later time jump, and then talk about Jean. And then episode 2 should have opened with Hargraves and Abigail. Because to find out that late in the show, or realize that late in the show, that everything he did was to get Abigail back, we needed to see the why. They needed to show us the why was it worth everything he did. Why? And why should we believe that Hargraves cares about someone else? Because every version we've seen of Hargraves doesn't care about anybody but themselves. And if it's just the selfish reasons, then okay, fine. But like, at least show us that. Don't expect us to just know it. That was a bit frustrating. But there's this moment where they're there and they're talking, and they talk about Ben, and they're like, well, this is a different Ben. You know, the other one died. He died in an accident, and it was tragic. And he was the best part of the Umbrella Academy, and he is in fact the Umbrella Academy. And there's this great moment where all the original characters are kind of going through it, like, wait, like 5 asks them, like, what happened to Ben? Like, how did he actually die? And they're just prattling off at the company line. And so that moment of like realization as a viewer, just being like, yeah, we don't ever get to see what happened to Ben when they were kids. So they show it. We get this whole Hargraves like their memory. This Hargraves is going to give them their memories back. It's a, whatever. And we get this flashback to the kids as the Umbrella Academy doing superheroing things, which was fun and could have been a little more fleshed out, but at least we got some of that. And he's like, hey, you're gonna go destroy this thing. They get there. Ben finds out that the thing they're destroying is a girl named Jennifer. It's the same girl, just from their timeline. And every time they touch, they get the ceiling. They start to like glow and bubble up and boil and not seem to be affected by it, the whole thing. And he shows up and shoots them both. And that's how Ben dies in the original, well, in the second timeline, I guess. So them getting together in this season when they're kind of thrust into that mission, which we haven't even gotten to that, is the cataclysmic event, and Victor's the kind of main propelling force trying to stop it. Victor's the one trying to track down Ben the most successfully. Everyone else is kind of doing their own thing. But one thing, and this is why Abigail needed to be more developed, is that it's like tail end of episode 5 revealed that the guy that hired the Umbrella Academy to go find his daughter, who was Jennifer, was not the guy played by, I believe, David Cross. The character's name was Sly or Sill or something. It was Sly. Was Abigail in a meat suit, which it seems that she's also an alien. I'm still unclear on if Hargrave Sr. is an alien or a robot or an alien robot. And then to that point, what is Abigail? Again, very just like could have used a moment. But we find out that it's her in a skin suit and she kills one of the genes and takes over for a total of 5 minutes of screen time, because that's how quickly that kind of moves forward. And the other gene picks up on the fact that like, oh, you're eating mint ice cream, and like, great. We don't have enough context to know that she'd pick up on it outside of that. They're just like, it's just was so rushed. It was so rushed. So anyways, the siblings realize, oh, we're going to keep, if 5 goes into there's this whole subway system, time traveling. They can go to different points in time. 5 finds a bar with a bunch of other 5s. It's the Council of Reeds. It's the Council of Kangs. It's the Council of Ricks. It's just every different version of 5 realizing, yeah, everything we do causes the end of the world, and we keep delaying the inevitable because the timeline shattered and it needs to go back to the original timeline where we don't exist. And again, very rushed. It's like, okay. And this is all happening like this stuff of, Ben and Jennifer being merged into a big kaiju monster. The, Jean turning on Jean, but it's actually Abigail turning on Jean kind of thing, is in that same episode. Victor trying to talk Ben down out of the situation, which I will say one of the good visual effects this season was some of the lighting effects around Ben, or around Victor and Allison's powers, and Ben's transformation into kind of a boiling creature. It was very gross. It was very body horror and grotesque. And so that was really interestingly done. By the time it turns into the giant monster, it looks a little hokey, but yeah, I've seen worse. Specifically in regards to the big monster. There's a point where you can see just the veins hanging out on a wall, and they're literally flat. I compare it to Cult of Chucky, when you just see a PNG wiggling of him, and that's supposed to be scary. It was rough. I don't know what happened in the season production wise. So yeah, they accept their fate, that they have to, all the marigold in them has to go into this creature, and that will act as a reset and fix the timeline and put it back to the original timeline where they don't exist. And they do it. And that's the part that got to me, was I didn't hate the ending. The actual like resolution to the situation and the execution of it. And There was some audio editing choices that were rough. I don't know if it was just the ADR or just a bad mix or what of all their like final words, but the actual like idea of it, how they went about it for the most part, really got to me. Really moved me because it did show a lot of the growth that the family had from where they started in the first season, where they kind of reset every season. And because we had all these really great slice of life moments, it felt that part felt earned. We had all their trauma from the first 3 seasons. We had a lot of really good moments with each of them here and there in this season. And so they die, and we get this kind of flashback montage as the timelines are being deleted of all the characters. I think I would have liked to seen a little more. It was pulling at the heartstrings, but I think I would have liked to seen just a couple more key moments placed in there. Not the biggest of deals. When we go back to the original timeline, where somehow Diego and Lila's kids and Claire's child, or no, Allison's child, Claire, and are there. Like, I'm not really sure what the implications are there, like how they got there, how they're alive, why didn't they get wiped from history, kind of stuff, like all that sort of thing. But it was a very sweet moment, and you get this kind of sweeping drone shot of this park where you see kind of all of the dead characters, people that died at various points in the first 3 seasons, kind of back just living their life in the original timeline. Like they never would have gotten involved with all of these different things had the Hargreaves never existed. Um, and that moment was nice. It felt a little corny, but it sure didn't make up for the season, which is such a bummer. It was such a good show. Yeah, it's a show that's I definitely intend to revisit at some point and rewatch. I'd rewatch the first 2 seasons before season 3. I didn't get around to rewatching it before this season. It kind of snuck up on me. And it's a bummer to have it go out on this note. I do appreciate the consistency though, because it was becoming a running joke of like, okay, the Umbrella Academy started the own apocalypse, and now like they started the apocalypse, and now they're gonna fix it. They started it and they're gonna fix it. They started it and they're gonna fix it, kind of thing. Except they're not fixing it, they're just putting a band-aid on it. So I did appreciate that kind of theme sticking the landing. And I really do, I get the sense that the cast really enjoyed doing this show. And it had to have been a fun show to work on. I think that's the other thing, is it had to have been at least a wacky show to work on. There were some really fun, creative things in the show's life that I think really had to have been a really, really fascinating day at work, kind of thing. There were a couple moments where they really pulled back on some of the combat this season, which was kind of a bummer. We get a great in idea, middle of the road execution fight with Diego and Luther at the CIA, but all of the punches feel pulled, and it's not the most well executed. We get the joke about the Captain America Winter Soldier elevator scene in this, but we don't see that fight with Luther in the elevator with a bunch of people, which could have been really funny given his size compared to someone like Cap. Instead, we just hear a bunch of banging and then him throwing one of them out of the elevator when it opens up. I think there were, yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up. I don't know. If you watched the final season and you enjoyed it, please let me know why. Like as a whole, like if you enjoyed it as a whole, please let me know why. If you were as disappointed as I am, let me know what you wish they would have done differently. I think literally this showed the last season would have just benefited by having another like 2 episodes and having a little more time with some of the newer supporting characters and existing supporting characters, and then just a little more time for the whole Lila Diego 5 love triangle nightmare just to breathe a little bit. I do like that they I appreciate that they were able to shove in another problematic relationship into the show. Good on them for that. Allison and Luther did not end up endgame, but boy, did we get the weirdest throuple I will have ever seen on TV. You can follow me at Junk Lobster and all the things. We stream Monday and Wednesdays over on Twitch. Mondays are drawing streams. Typically it's like horror characters mixed with like cartoon characters, which has been a lot of fun. I got a Redbubble up now. All those links are down in the description. They're on my link tree. You can go check stuff out there. And yeah, let me know what you thought of the final season of Umbrella Academy.